So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this session at the ISD Trade and Sustainability Hub. I'm delighted to welcome you all here on behalf of TESS, the Forum on Trade, Environment and the SDGs, UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, and also the Pew Charitable Trusts. We're really delighted to be co-hosting this event with great colleagues and whose work I admire so much. This morning, we're going to be discussing fostering trade-related cooperation on plastic pollution, and we're focusing on the dialogue on plastic pollution at the WTO, its work both here at MC13, or the work that it's presented here, and also beyond MC13 is really the focus of our discussion today. I'm really delighted to have with me Eiko Lim, who is the Director of the Trade and Environment Division at the WTO and has really been responsible for enabling and supporting much of this work on the dialogue on plastics pollution with his team over the last few years, and who also has been really thrust upon him this new interest and engagement on environment at the WTO. So he's been working extremely hard, I think, in the last 2 years, and hopefully will be able to give us an update on that work from his viewpoint. We also have Chantaline from UNCTAD, Chantaline Carpentier, and who is the new head of the Trade, Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development Division at UNCTAD. And we have Isabel Jarrett, who's a senior manager focusing really on plastics pollution and the Plastics Treaty and the DPP at Pew. So we have 3 great speakers with us. Unfortunately, because of the negotiations and the ongoing flux of that, we don't have one of the representatives on the panel of the DPP coordinators, but we do have at least one in the audience, and so maybe afterwards he can give us some reflections if he wishes to. So just by way, before I turn to our speakers, just by way of context, we know that plastic pollution affects all countries. It occurs across the life cycle of plastics. It has negative impacts not only on the environment, but also on the economies of countries, and for many countries on very key sectors like tourism, agriculture and fisheries. Among others, it also has an enormous fiscal cost on many countries. There's sewage systems, water systems, cleanup costs, and so on. The plastic sector also contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. We know that over the last 50 years, in my lifetime, there's been an extraordinary growth in the production of plastics, and now is at 460 million tons, metric tons, in 2019. It's projected to grow to over 700 million by 2040. So I think that even while one can acknowledge that plastics are a very useful material, they're everywhere, all around us, in all kinds of different applications, the world will find it very difficult, in fact already finds it impossible to manage the degree of pollution and waste associated with the scale of plastic production that we have. So we need to find ways of making sure we're using plastic where it's necessary, and also not using it where it's unnecessary or where it's harmful to human health and harmful to the environment. So in that context, I was really delighted when the dialogue on plastic pollution was established in 2021, led first by Fiji and China, then joined by another 6 countries, and now with 78 members, to really acknowledge that plastic pollution is a tremendous global environmental challenge, and also to understand where trade and trade policy can help governments to tackle that. And so it's really a tremendous effort at the WTO with a really diverse group. They have a very balanced, I think, approach to the issue, looking at both ways in which we can use trade and harness trade to promote action to tackle plastic pollution, also considering where trade and trade policy cooperation may be needed to reduce, and more broadly what can be done in terms of transparency and international cooperation. But I won't speak any more about the DPP, but just wanted to give that context. I want to turn to my colleagues to do that, and hopefully we have time today for a discussion as well about what that work is. So I will turn first to Ho Lim to give us his perspective on what they've achieved so far and next steps.
Thanks very much, Caroline. Great to be here with Chantaline, and also my eyesight fails me, but Isabel, sorry, and all of you this morning. Sorry if I'm a little bit Yeah, not fully coherent. We had negotiations up till quite late last night. So, in any case, I think this is one of the great stories that we have at MC13 at the beginning. We had the three environmental initiatives launch their statements. And amongst the three environmental initiatives, as we're talking about this morning, you have the dialogue on plastics pollution. Some of the co-coordinators are here, and I believe the number now is 78. I think there were the two new members who joined. And the statement was released with a press conference with the ministers of the countries, co-coordinating countries, as well the co-sponsors in the audience and with the press. I think you already know a lot about why this is such an important initiative. If you're here in the room, obviously plastics pollution, a really serious 21st century environmental challenge. Which, as Caroline has said, can only be resolved through international cooperation. And key element of that international cooperation has to be looked at in terms of how plastic is exchanged throughout the world. And plastic is exchanged throughout the world across borders in many different ways. It's a feedstock, it is also in products, it is also an entity in itself, if you like, in terms of the uses that plastic has. And it's embedded in many of our products. Virtually all of our products will contain some element of plastics. So when this dialogue emerged among the members, and it's started as a small group of members, I would say, and I think it started in 2020. And in WTO terms, it's been exponential, the growth, if you like. In a few years, the dialogue expanded. Now you have 78 members, and they've agreed to a ministerial statement that contains concrete principles and actions. And I think that's very impressive. I mean, this is the work of the members. I have to underline, in the Secretariat, we help the members to the extent that we can, but what's impressive is that this is a member-driven process with the 78 members involved. So I'll just run through quickly what are some of the things that they have put in the statement. The statement is available. You can find it on the WTO website. And I think it's quite innovative because it's a very different type of statement from the one you normally get from the WTO. So here you have 6 principles, and underneath each of the principles you have actions that are being agreed upon. And these actions themselves are quite detailed, and they link back to what was found over the last two or so years of the work of the dialogue, looking at what were actual measures, standards, regulations, practices that governments have already undertaken. And in that sense, it's very interesting to me because it bridges that gap sometimes that we have at the WTO between the environmental side of things and the trade side of things, since it goes very deep into what type of measures have been taken. So the first sort of principle you have is about transparency, increasing transparency of trade flows of plastics. As I mentioned, these trade flows occur through single-use plastics, through plastics embedded in other goods, and often it's not well captured by data or trade data. So one big challenge and one principle they agree to is to improve that transparency. How to improve that transparency requires quite a bit of technical work, and these are the actions. And what is proposed here is to break down customs classification to facilitate monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and eventually regulation of trade in polymers, chemicals, additives, plastics products, and so forth. Because unless you can classify, you can't trace, and that's as basic as it gets. And World Customs Organization classifications are not sufficiently detailed to allow that type of breakdown. Transparency can be aided by customs and technological solutions, so it also talks about identifying certain customs and related technical solutions that can be done in cooperation with the private sector, on standards and on other applications to identify trade flows in the life cycle of plastics. I won't go too much, otherwise I would spend the whole time going through the whole statement. That was just to give you an illustration of the type of statement that you have. The other principles are about reducing plastics that are harmful to environment or human health, or unnecessary use of single-use plastics and plastics packaging. You have a principle on promoting, I think this is quite important, promoting non-plastic substitutes, alternatives, services, and technologies. Again, the statement provides you with some examples of what these alternatives and substitutes could be. That fits in very well with the traditional, if I can say, trade agenda of promoting a sector. In this case, a sector that can also be very important to combating plastics pollution. And it also identifies certain things that governments could be doing themselves. For instance, through promotion of certain types of support measures. Often these things are already happening, actually. And support measures could also be in terms of public procurement schemes, for instance, in supporting, in this case, plastic substitutes and alternatives. There's a principle also in improving the capacity of developing countries. I think this came out quite strongly over the dialogue, was that, to enable that sort of transition to combating plastics pollution, one has to also deal with capacity. Sometimes plastics pollution occurs not because there's a wish to pollute, but more because waste management systems are not well set up, or classification systems do not allow for good recycling. Maybe the technologies are not there, or it's very costly, or perhaps enforcement is a really big issue. So part of the dialogue was also looking at how trade can be used to help improve the capacity of developing countries. And here one can look at existing mechanisms that already exist, such as aid for trade as one vehicle. There are many other vehicles, but just mention one of these. And I think what's quite important also is to be very specific in the capacity building. What actually is it that is required? And so quite a bit of the dialogue also looked at how can one actually identify what are the key capacity building challenges that are out there that have to be addressed. The other part of the dialogue, which I think is very unique, is that it was being undertaken actually before the UN treaty negotiations started. This was the plastics treaty negotiations. And since then, there has been a lot of communication between the co-coordinators of the dialogue on plastics and the UN plastic treaty negotiations. They have been providing briefings to the UN treaty negotiations under the INC, and it has been welcome, I would say. I'd be interested to hear your views. Of course, some of you must follow this quite closely, but we understand from the Secretariat point of view, from the UNEP Secretariat, and we work closely with UNEP as well, that it has been very much welcome to have that trade input to help them identify some of the trade issues that are involved in curbing plastics pollution. So that is a fairly sort of broad brush overview of what you have in that statement. And there will be further work. I don't think this is the end of the dialogue on plastics pollution, but it's a very important part of their journey. And we hope that it will succeed to support the UN Plastics Treaty negotiations, which has its deadline towards the end of this year. So let me stop there, Caroline, and then pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Ho. That was a great overview. Just a couple of things I wanted to pick up was, firstly, as you said, like the significance of the declaration that was issued on Tuesday. So from 6 ministers, but reflecting a consensus of 78 members. It's a really broad group of members who have together come up with this statement. So that's really, when you look at the diversity, you have the EU, China, the US, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Russia. That's some of the biggest plastic producers in the world being part of this initiative. And then this diversity of other countries who are involved at all kinds of different parts of the plastics value chain, who have significant trade interests at stake, to some of the smallest countries and least developed countries in the world as part of the same initiative. I think it's very significant because there's a collective recognition that there's an environmental crisis at hand that needs to be addressed, and also an effort to tackle the economic challenges that will be there in the kind of transformation that would need to take place across supply chains. And just to pick up on one other thing that Ho mentioned is that I think it's really exciting, actually, that the WTO was out in front of the environment world in the sense of already looking at these trade issues before they arose or have been really reflected upon. And so in this sense, the WTO has a real opportunity and the work there to inform the work of the environment negotiators. And already we see in the WTO process, there are an increasing number of environment negotiators that participate in the DPP sessions. So it's helping to build something that those of us working on trade and environment have been trying to spur for many, many years, is better interaction between the trade and environment communities. So I think the DPP has really been catalytic in that respect, and I think really helped us to put data on the table. All of these factual compilations that accompany the ministerial statement are impressive because they also will help environment negotiators see, countries are taking trade-related action already, especially developing countries are taking trade-related action around plastic pollution. And the last thing I'll say before turning to Chantaline is that it's really been a developing country-led initiative. It's the first time in the WTO that you've had that kind of energy, the diversity of developing countries engaged. I think they are more than half of the membership of the DPP are developing countries, and also they're in partnership with a range of developed countries. So it's really been I think, a really exciting process of seeing countries come together. So with that, I'll turn next to Chantaline, who's going to give a perspective from UNCTAD and the work that they've been doing on plastics and plastic pollution. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you, Heiko, for setting the scene very, very well. What I would like to do, and I have some slides, if we could put them up, second one, is to go on one of the principles that Heiko mentioned, which is trade in non-plastic substitute, especially, and alignment of the international commitment. So next slide, please. What we find at UNCTAD is 369 million tons of plastic have been traded in 2021 alone, and that's represent a value of $1.2 trillion. That's not insignificant. That's an increase of 30% in 1 year. So we're talking, Heiko was talking about exponential growth in membership, but it's correlated with the international growth also in plastic use. What we find, though, that we find interesting, and it's not going to surprise the expert in this room, is that only 0.2% of this trade is in plastic scrap. So that means the trade is bringing plastic around the world, but trade is not helping bringing plastic back where it started from. It just stays in the countries where it gets. And why is that? And Heiko kind of alluded to it in the statement, is their lack of recycling capacity on the one hand in many of these countries. On the second hand, is the extreme complexity of the supply chain in ensuring that you actually have, I don't know how many of you were at the World Economic Forum Trade Tech yesterday, and we had sessions specifically on circularity and the supply chain. And as soon as you have a chip in any component, even if it's plastic, it becomes an e-waste classification, and therefore it goes onto Basel. As soon as you have, you have all of these complexities, which means that the trade waste doesn't get traded. Wasted plastic doesn't get traded. So basically, we need to identify what material or product could effectively substitute plastics and implement the transition, which will not, as Caroline mentioned, be an easy one. There's going to be a tough act to pull. So what we did look at UNCTAD, and Heiko mentioned the HS code, is to look at 282 products, 282 HS code, that represent $388 billion of potential non-plastic substitute. And next slide, please. What I'd like to make sure that we understand is the differences between plastic and alternative versus non-plastic substitute. And we do celebrate at UNCTAD that non-plastic substitute is in the statement. Why? Because as you can see from this slide, the plastic substitute will come from mineral, plant, marine, or animal, as opposed to the plastic alternative, which are biodegradable and other form of plastics. They also, they differ in their origin, in their properties, and in their impact. So, and we'll come back to the impact later, but in terms of the plastic substitute, what we try to find is minimizing environmental impact. And sometimes by trying to minimizing the plastic content, you can actually increase the impact on land use, water, and others. So this is the balance that we need to achieve. And I mentioned the next slide, please. The INC process, both the INC process and the DPP process that have been mentioned by Caroline and Heiko, do mention the non-plastic substitute. So this is a major achievement, I think, for the world and the environmental community. Next slide. Unfortunately, so far, the majority of the non-plastic substitute traded are raw material. And so that means that there is a missed opportunity, business opportunity for developing countries with a comparative advantage in these non-plastic substitute to take advantage of this transformation. So as you can see in blue, those are raw material that are traded. Based on these HS code I mentioned. And then on the right-hand side, the smaller section on minerals and natural fibers, these are basically products. So they have some value added to them, which benefit the countries, oftentimes developing countries. And if we go to the next slide, please. One of the reasons why, one of the hindrance to more non-plastic substitute is higher tariffs on the non-plastic substitute compared to the plastic item. So I'll just draw your attention to two examples here. At the top in the middle there, you have straw paper, right? A lot of hype about that. It has a tariff of 14%. If you go down about just below it, at the bottom there, you have the drinking straws. Those are the traditional one, and those have half the tariffs on them. And that's pretty much across the board. These are average around the world, but this is pretty much what we see for those. So next slide, please. However, this is not the only story. You have there on the right-hand side the website of my dear colleague Enrique Pacini's work on looking at the life cycle analysis of these substitutes to see what is the total impact of those non-substitute. And it's not very simple. You can use this tool online and check it for yourself. But just to give you an example, on the plastic plate compared with a natural fiber, like with banana leaves, you can see that there's many parameters where the natural option can have significant environmental impact, such as in terrestrial ecotoxicity, marine and freshwater eutrophication. So you can't just offhand know without deep analysis which one is a better alternative. So we need to have the data, the modeling, and the capacity to look at those. Next one. And the next one is a paper that is about to come that is in clearance right now. So we're really looking forward to it to come out. And it's trade-related measures. So what we did is to look at the notification at WTO and look at trade-related measures on non-plastic substitute. And there are 243 measures that we mapped. You can see here. And that paper is then looking at the substitute that are increasingly facing trade-related measures. And they are higher than the average yearly notification for the entire WTO environmental database. So the number of notifications for non-plastic substitute is growing faster than on average environmental goods. So that's a sign of concern for us. And if we go to the next one, Heiko mentioned one of the objectives of the DPP colleagues, member state, and this is reflected here. So this is the 243 200, sorry, I can't read the number, it's too small. But all of the one that the notification I just mentioned. And you can see that most notification are environmental and health related measures. So it's both together. And so it's not just environmental, it's not, and many of them are health related. And we're going to pursue the work on these areas to see what that really means and how we can, again, provide some advice to help the colleagues with the INC, but also the DPP. And last slide, please. In the future, what we want to do also is to help contribute to the WTO dialogue on plastics pollution, is to assist country in regulation of biodegradable compostable using these tools, analyze the trade and services for prevention and mitigation of plastic pollution. Many of what is in this end of the life or the treatment of non-plastic is basically services and not goods. So how do we address that? And then the technical assistance, which was also mentioned by Arco, to support country in developing frontier products. So how can we help developing countries take advantage generally of the transformation that we need to see in all of our economies if we want to reach address the triple environmental crisis, and help them add value to agro residues, seaweeds, biodegradable fishing gear that we see are having, next slide please, potential great value. So over to you, Carolyn. I hope that's helpful. And
very, very helpful, and great that you also finished on that sort of forward-looking note of what next in the DPP, which I think will segue well to our next speaker. So just before I introduce Isabel, just to say one of the most innovative things I think about the DPP and all three of the member-led initiatives at the WTO is that they have opened up more space for engagement of stakeholders. And that has generated many useful inputs, I think, presentations from a range of different actors that have really helped inform the work of members. And so that's a key innovation just to bear in mind. And a second thing, I think, is that when we look at the statement itself, they commit themselves to continuing that open, inclusive and transparent engagement. It's open, of course, to other WTO members, but to relevant stakeholders as well. So that's a good sign of a commitment and a reflection of the importance that members themselves have paid to this. And some of the work, such as on non-plastic substitutes, it's really relied on organisations like UNCTAD has been really driving and supporting the analysis around that. And that's what countries will need, because what they have said in their statement, which is also significant, the first statement back in 2021 talked about identifying issues in a set of areas. And the really significant thing you'll see here is it says, we agree on the importance of international cooperation on the following actions and pursuing such actions. It says on a voluntary basis, individually and collectively, but it's really a shift. So they have spent 2 years identifying and understanding, okay, we want to try and promote cooperation in these specific areas that are in the statement. And so that means that there's work to be done to help them identify how exactly to do that in the coming 2 years, because they have also said they look forward to further concrete, pragmatic and effective outcomes on these actions and understanding at the latest by MC14. So there's some work to be done to work out exactly what they can deliver and how concretely, individually, collectively, voluntarily, but still it's a really good sign of progress among a will to cooperate on these different issues going forward. So in that regard, I'm really delighted to turn to Isabel Jarrett from the Pew Charitable Trust, who's one of the stakeholders the DPP coordinators has invited to participate. Of course, they have a huge expertise in the area of plastic pollution and tackling plastic pollution generally. It'd be great to hear your views on where to next and how can we support governments to deliver some action and progress on this topic.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you to all of you for being here so early in the morning. And I've set myself a goal for the next few minutes, and I hope I achieve it. But if I don't, apologies in advance. I'm going to try not to cough. So if I do, I'm really sorry. But thank you again to all of you for being here, and also want to acknowledge, as we have one of the delegates here in the room, picking up on something Carolyn said, that Pew is delighted to be able to participate in the DPP meetings as a stakeholder, and it really is, as Carolyn said, an innovation in terms of engagement at the WTO, that stakeholders can be so present and so engaged in the process. So thank you. And we look forward to continuing to support your work. Perhaps before diving into the statement and what's next for the DPP, I can just give you all a sense of why Pew is engaged and following the DPP and why we think it's important. So our 2020 research, peer-reviewed, scientific-led, Breaking the Plastic Wave is the name of the report, found that we can reduce the amount of plastic flowing into the ocean by 2040 by 80% with existing solutions, but only if we take a system change approach. So we have the tools, we have the solutions, but we need a system change, a system-wide approach. So that means that everybody needs to be engaged in solving the problem. It's not simply just down to recycling a little bit more or producing a little bit less plastic. It's across the supply chain and across the different solutions, and we need to leverage them all at the same time. So that's where we come at this, and we really believe that trade and governments, both in the INC but also in the WTO, have an important role, of course, to play in helping us achieve an 80% reduction in plastic pollution by 2040. And I wanted to just put into perspective 2040 for you all, because sometimes we hear 2040 a lot, right? 2040 it's batted around as a key date. And when Carolyn said, Carolyn, in my lifetime, the plastic has just exponentially grown. And I thought, wow, 2040 is when my daughter, who's now 18 months, will be 18 years old. And although that seems frightening to me, it's also not that far off. So we really have a lot of work to do in a short amount of time, and that's why we need all stakeholders to be engaged. So with that, let me just turn to the DPP more specifically, and to what was said, but also to where Pew thinks the next steps for the DPP might lie. Now, of course, I think we can all safely say that nobody wants plastic pollution in their countries. It's a near universal problem, and I think we all want to see it solved. And I thought yesterday in the press conference, the co-convening ministers spoke really poignantly to the impacts of plastic pollution in their countries. We heard about the impacts of ocean pollution. We heard about, from the Minister Simmons from Barbados, about the impact of plastic pollution on coral reefs. And of course, the immediate impact is on the environment. But of course, as Carolyn said, these impacts flow to fisheries, for example, affect the fisheries sector, affect the tourism sector, and these are all key elements of the economy. I'm underlining this point because, of course, economies and transforming economies is going to be key to how we tackle plastic pollution, and that's why the WTO is so critical in solving this problem. But to leave it unresolved would, of course, equally leave us and countries open to the adverse impacts of plastic pollution on their economies. So I want to draw on three things that was from the statement and that was said yesterday, and then I'll give you two ideas for where we think the DPP can go in its forward plan. So first, the overarching message that was loud and clear from ministers yesterday was the need for international cooperation. To quote the Australian minister, he said, "Australia cannot go it alone. No one can go it alone." And I think that's really, 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 really key. And of course, they all drew upon the interconnected nature of the work at the WTO with other international bodies such as the INC. Now, although there, of course, is that interconnectivity, I think the second message I got loud and clear yesterday and from the statement is that there really is a distinct and clear role for trade and a need for dedicated conversation in trade forums about how to tackle the problem of plastic pollution. And the third, I think, and has been drawn upon by my speakers, is action is already being taken by many countries around the world. There was discussion yesterday of single-use plastics. We've heard from many countries that they're trying to tackle this problem. And so we know action is already underway, and we simply need to build on this. We have a foundation, so now let's build the structure. I thought that the factual compilations that accompany the statement were also particularly useful in both underlying the point I just made, that there's lots of action already being taken, but also we can begin to see where action might be taken in the next phase of the DPP. So I'm going to use I'm going to give two possible ways for the DPP to perhaps think about their next phase of work. And both elements were mentioned yesterday by ministers. Now, first, we know that a lot of countries are taking action on single-use plastics, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned. So one possible area for the DPP to take forward is thinking about how they might expand geographically, how they could bring other members, perhaps part of the DPP or not part of the DPP, to take action on single-use plastics. So how can they build on lessons learned from measures that have already been taken to further expand geographically the measures taken to reduce or to ban single-use plastics? And then the second lens that we can use to look through how the DPP might take forward their work is, of course, a thematic expansion. Now, I'm borrowing heavily, I have to say, I have my colleague Yeva here in the audience, from ISD's very good brief on trade-related measures to combat plastic pollution. So I should give them credit for this very useful framing. But there's thematic expansion as well. So where can governments, what other products, perhaps, that are really at the forefront of the environmental problem that haven't been addressed, or maybe have been addressed but not as broadly as single-use plastics? What are those products that governments can begin to expand thematically? And I think that this was mentioned by ministers yesterday. Plastic packaging, excessive plastic packaging, is perhaps the next frontier for the DPP. And so, to sum up, I think that what we need to see, although I've used the word expansion in both geographically and thematically, but the DPP should think about narrowing its focus for the next round of work. So really keying in on key areas. And that's why I've drawn upon single-use plastics and packaging. And of course, I'm coming at this very much from a reduction point of view, and I know there's other elements and other themes that the delegates are concerned with. But we would recommend that there's a narrowing of focus to really help get at tangible actions and outcomes by MC13. And these two areas that I've mentioned, single-use packaging and single-use plastic, and packaging are ones that we think are ripe for next steps, but are by no means the only options. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for being concrete about your recommendations on next steps. So we've had those around the reduction side, single-use products and packaging, both of which are reflected in the ministerial statement. And then we've had from UNCTAD a focus on some of the promote aspects around non-plastic substitutes, but also around services related to environmentally sound waste management as well. So there's those two aspects, and I would also note there's ongoing work at the DPP around some issues related to the HS system and the WCOs. That's in the other part of the dialogues. Their third work stream looks at some issues around trying to improve the way we can monitor and track trade flows in plastics across the life cycle. And of course, there's potential for work around aid for trade. On plastic pollution as well that Iconium mentioned. So there's the nice thing I think about the dialogue on plastic pollution is that there's an effort to have elements of it that work for the range of different members in it. But I do hear strongly Isabel's point that if we're going to deliver something, members are going to deliver something more concrete, there'll be a need in each of those work streams perhaps to focus on some more concrete ways that they can fulfill their commitment to action. So that's enough from us. I think we have just about 15 minutes for any reflections or questions. And just before I take some questions, I did want to ask Joao, did you want to make any reflection? I don't want to put you on the spot. Yes, he's willing to. So Joao is one of the DPP 6 coordinators, or the representative of the 6 coordinating countries, and has been really, I would say, the father of the DPP initiative at the DPP with others. Too young to be a father, but has really been a great supporter of this. So over to you, Joao.
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks a lot for ISD Pew, TS, UNCTAD to organize this very, very good event. We are very happy. I'm very happy to be here. And as Caroline already mentioned, that now for the DPP, there are 78 members already co-sponsors the initiative, and the co-sponsors now is almost cover more than 85% of the plastic trade in the world. And yeah, maybe I take this opportunity. I would like to really appreciate all your support from ISD, from Pew, from UNCTAD, and TSS. Yes, you contribute a lot, and you support the members very much to develop this initiative. Especially, I want to thank to Secretariat. With the whole, yes, without your support, I don't think that we can make what we have happened today. And yeah, maybe I would like to share some. I didn't prepare anything, so I just maybe very personally and feeling that because I participated in this initiative from the very beginning. Now we really see that it developed very well. Because in current days, we know now it's not very easy to get consensus. But finally, in this yesterday in the press briefing, the minister's statement actually almost gets endorsed by all the ministers almost. Yeah, so we are really very happy to see that all the trade ministers show their strong willingness to tackle plastic pollution and to enable the sustainable plastic trade. And it's frankly say it's not so easy. And even each wording in this statement, we put a lot of time to discuss among the members. We received more than 600 comments from members. And in the meantime, we also received hundreds of comments from stakeholders, including today on the podium. And all of these are very, very important for we to develop this dialogue. So just by saying this, I want to say that we really appreciate all the support from Secretariat, from international organization, from the NGOs. Without your support, we don't think that we can make progress as what we have done. Because this, we really hope for the dialogue, we always keep it inclusive, open, transparency from the very beginning until now. We always try to listen to the voice, to the concern from not only from members, but also from all the stakeholders. Because we are thinking that the WTO is not only the WTO of Secretariat or members, it's WTO is for the people, trade is for people. So we must listen to our voice from everyone to see how we can work together to find a feasible solution for to solve this big challenge. So yes, I just want to say again that thank you a lot, and we are really carefully listening to your voice, and we will consider all of this in our further work. And also, I want to take the opportunity to ask you if you have any channel to talk with other members, because we have 76 members, but we still need more. As I mentioned, that we already cover the 85% of plastic trade in the world, but we have only less than half of the members. It means that the big economies already in it, but many developing members and the small islands and the small delegates of the WTO, they are still not on board, but we really look forward to their participating, because their voice is very, very important. Even they have small delegation. So I really appreciate if you could reach out to them and ask them to join it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xiaohui. So now I have time for a couple of questions. I'll take a couple and then we'll go back to the panel and then we'll close. So I think there's a gentleman there and one in the front as well.
Hello, thanks for the panel. I work for an organization that we have been retrieving and locating ghost gear for the last 8 years. And we have been more or less successful in locating, retrieving, and taking the ghost gear out of the water. But we have failed every single time we have wanted to recycle. This is because we don't have the right facilities in Mexico and we have to send it abroad. And every time we had wanted to send these nets abroad, we have failed because there is not a definition or a clear definition on the tariffs. We have tariffs for new nets. So the customs officers want to charge the tariffs for as if it was a new net, but it's not even possible to identify what kind of net was it at first, because it's a material that at the end of their life cycle. And once we left the nets like for 6 months in customs, and non-officers and non-customs agencies can solve that. And I'm sure the fishing industry is not the only one that has this problem for making commerce of materials at the end of their life cycle. Is there any possibility these negotiations at WTO can start like putting some rules to the countries or some new ideas on how to make commerce of plastic materials out at the end of the life cycle, and to simplify all this process? And that is, and what can we do for making that possible? That's my question.
Thank you. That's a great question. I'll take another one and then we'll ask the panelists to respond to that. Please, the gentleman at the front.
Thank you very much for this enlightening discussion on plastic. Plastic was discovered, I think, in 1907, and since then we live with plastics. And then plastic is a very general name from a family of products. And I think that the gentleman here, Ike, was mentioning that one of the needs is for classification of it. What do we mean by that? So it's really in kind of contradiction, because you have to define what is plastics, and then you use transparency, which is a very opaque term when you don't really define what you mean by plastic. And I think that also Ankted Chantilly, she was mentioning it when she was speaking about plastics. So this is on the one hand, and I think that one missing members on this table is also multinational companies or corporates. They have a big stake on that. Because we are consumers, most of us, we don't really have a say on that. So my question is, how far are we in terms of classification? Because whether we have agreements or not, when you check the supply chain without a specific definition of what you mean by plastic, you won't be able to, in fact, avoid the spread of it in the supply chain, global supply chain I'm talking about. And you don't have to have the agreements of all members, really. When you have some restriction on the supply chain, then global supply chain, then you can prevent it to begin with. But my question to you is how far, what are the gaps? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to take one more question. Is it from Timor-Leste? Yes, super. The newest WTO member. Yay.
Thank you very much. Give opportunity to me. I want to introduce myself. My name, Dr. Manuel da Costa. I come from Timor-Leste. I'm the new member of the WTO. So, yeah, this confused for me. So please help us, Timor-Leste, how to solve the problem about the plastic in Timor-Leste. Because we are the new country, and then we are the developed country. We are already member to WTO, so please help us how solve the problem plastic in Timor-Leste. Because we not produce plastic in the country, but my observation that every plastic come to Timor-Leste all importation. produce from the outside. And I think all the plastic, I need plastic because plastic is a lot of color and a lot of quality. So some is a good quality, beautiful quality, strong quality, and some is a weak quality. So small, yeah. That's why I think this is for. So today I'm lucky I between you in this room, and I have three people Timor Leste in this room. So of course our friend from the Minister Bank Central Timor Leste also here, and other. So we want to control the plastic in Timor Leste with law and regulation. So plastic we can continue, but important how to control so we can how to solve the problem plastic in Timor Leste. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. I'm going to turn back to the panelists, but first I have to say the first thing you could do is join the dialogue on plastic pollution. That will be my, from words to action today. That would be something I think. Shaiwi, do you want to say something very quickly? Because that's a great place that you can work at least with other members and learn what they are doing.
I'm very happy today to see a new member to join today's event. We really warmly welcome you to join the dialogue. If you can announce it, today is a big step forward. Thank you.
So there we go. We're taking action at MC13. Let's look forward. Well, we leave this to the governments to close the deal this week of a new member of the DPP. But meanwhile, just to more seriously on your point, one of the things I think is of great interest and has attracted many members to the DPP is many countries are involved in these supply chains. And as you know, the applications of plastics are very different in different sectors. It's extremely complex. And this is why whilst one can be ambitious, it's tough to make it feasible for different countries to make these transformations. And that's why I think, you know, the dialogue is so important because it recognizes these challenges, hence the 600 comments on the statement. But having said that, many countries are involved, but for many developing countries and some developed countries, they're just recipients of these products, right? They're not choosing how they're designed to ensure that they're recyclable or that they don't have additives that are hard for the country to manage or that they're reusable or so on. So many countries are importers of products that they don't control that. And then you're stuck with it. And with packaging, you want to buy the product. You didn't necessarily want to have to deal with all the packaging in your country either. And so there's a lot that we have to do through international cooperation around that. And you're certainly not alone. That's the point. But it's one of the reasons we also can't manage the problem alone and need international cooperation. So with that, and just one point I wanted to make is, actually, I won't make any more points. I'll turn to Ho and the others to answer the two questions that we had as well, please.
No, I think they're great questions, but I think at the outset it's important to understand, and I hope the dialogue partners agree with me that, you know, trade and trade policy is not going to solve all of the problems of plastics pollution. That's one. And two, WTO is not going to be the scientific place to work out, as the gentleman was saying, you know, which plastics exactly, which types of toxicity levels, what type of biodegradability or not. That's beyond the scope of trade experts. That's not the purpose of the dialogue. A lot of those types of discussions are rightly in the UN fora, which is in this case is the INC, and it's under the UNEA process. But what the dialogue on plastics does is to try to bring these different parts together. I mean, that's how trade works. That's how trade rules work for everything that is traded. Similarly, with classification, you have another organization, the World Customs Organization, which is the one that is defining classifications that are used by customs. And there's a relationship between the World Customs Organization and the WTO and the trade delegates at the WTO, but it's another process. And that's why it's so complex. So the challenge that you talked about, fishing nets and secondary use materials and so forth, is a clear challenge. And The World Customs Organization is aware of that, and they have it in their work for reclassification under the HS codes. And that's where the dialogue of plastics has been very important, because it has identified to the WCO what types of things they should be working on. So it's that type of relationship that we're talking about, that the trade community identifies what it can identify. It then points out where the problems are and where the gaps are, relays it back, in this case, to the WCO for classification, requiring the WCO to then revise its HS codes, if it can, to try to improve classification that could address some of these challenges that we've talked about. But then national customs also have a lot of possibility. I mean, they have HS codes, but they can also design their own national level classification. So there's possibility there. But what we don't want to have is huge fragmentation, everybody doing their own thing. That's why trade brings things together. It's not necessarily going to define everything for you, but it provides that ability to bring things together. There's 1 minute warning, so I better shut up now and pass back.
Thank you very much for that great answer and emphasizing the challenges of fragmentation. I'm going to quickly turn, maybe I can have half a minute each from Isabel and then from Chantaline, and then we'll be here. There's a coffee break afterwards, so we can continue the discussion. Go ahead, Isabel.
Thanks, Carolyn. I'll just very quickly say that I loved Enrique's example, and I also really appreciated the words from the gentleman from Timor-Leste, because I think this really illuminates exactly why the DPP is important. We need these concrete examples. We need countries to come together and say, hey, I'm having an issue with this. How do I do this? And when we get down to those concrete examples, the discussion is going to be very, very rich, because maybe other countries aren't experiencing exactly the same thing as you, but they will have experienced similar problems. And so I think that, for me, is just exemplifies why we need the DPP and why it's so important to have a forum for discussion. And getting into these concrete examples is where the DPP needs to go next. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Chantaline.
Yeah, in half a minute, I'm not going to say much, except that totally agree. I mean, one of the things that was mentioned yesterday on the code, the HS code, we need disaggregation of these codes, as you mentioned. And yet, at the World Customs Organization, they only review those every 5 years. Could we speed that up? Because we need to. And I see somebody, I think, was with us yesterday and can say some more about that. But since I have half a minute, I'll just say that we are having a side event at the INC negotiation in Ottawa, where we're going to present some of these solutions. So please join us, and happy to answer any question you have. We're working, I think you mentioned fisheries as well. We're looking at fishing nets and biodegradable fishing nets and non-polluting ones. So we're trying to put all these things together, and just, count on us if you have specific, more scientific research analysis in the market. Happy to help.
Oh, thank you very much, Chantaline. You were actually really stuck with the half a minute. So look, thank you all very much for coming so early this morning to this discussion. I think it's been really rich. We probably could have had another half-hour discussion on the topic, but thank you all again, and thank you to your excellent speakers for bringing very concrete ways forward on this topic, and for Ho for coming from the Secretariat. And I just wanted to cheer again for the work of the Dialogue on Plastic Pollution. I think this is something that the environment and trade communities can be really proud of as an innovative and very focused and forward-looking effort at the WTO. So thank you all again.